The streets of Manhattan glittered under a haze of neon lights, the air alive with honking taxis, chatter, and the occasional wail of a siren. On the 12th floor of an upscale apartment building, Claire Montgomery stood in front of her door, heels dangling from one hand, a sleek leather handbag slipping from the other. She stared at the doorknob with disbelief, then checked her bag again for the third time. No keys. She sank against the door with a sharp exhale, pinching the bridge of her nose. Of course, this would happen tonight of all nights. Claire Montgomery was not the kind of woman who lost keys. She was the kind who commanded boardrooms, who struck fear into seasoned investors, who could walk into a room of 50 men in tailored suits and leave them scrambling to agree with her. But tonight, she was a CEO reduced to helplessness by a stupid lock. Her phone was dead, naturally, because she'd left her charger in the office after storming out of a 4-hour board meeting where she'd been questioned, interrupted, and condescended to one too many times. The board had been discussing expansion into Europe, but really, it had turned into another episode of Let's Doubt Claire. "You're pushing too fast," one director had said. "Are you sure the numbers hold?" Another had pressed. And then, the worst, maybe someone with more experience should handle international strategy. Translation. A man. She had walked out before she threw her water glass at them. And now here she was, stranded in her own hallway, barefoot, and very much not in control. Claire leaned her forehead against the door, muttering to herself. Brilliant. The woman who built a company from scratch can't even get into her own apartment. Everything okay there? The voice was deep, warm, and startling. She spun around, clutching her bag like a shield. A man stood a few feet away, holding a brown grocery bag in one arm. He looked to be in his mid-30s, maybe a little older, with tired eyes but a kind face. His dark hair was messy in that unintentional way that somehow worked. His shirt sleeves were rolled to the elbows, showing strong forearms, and his jeans bore faint dust stains, like he'd been working with his hands all day. Beside him, a little girl peeked out from behind his leg. She couldn't have been more than 6. Big brown eyes, hair in 2 uneven pigtails, and a pink backpack still strapped on. Claire straightened, pulling her polished CEO mask back into place. "I'm fine. Just locked out." The girl whispered loudly, "Daddy can fix doors." The man chuckled, giving Claire an apologetic look. "She tends to oversell me. I'm no locksmith." Claire raised an eyebrow. "That's reassuring. But," he added, shifting the grocery bag to his other arm, "I do know a thing or two about stuck locks. Comes with the territory of old apartments and zero patience waiting for building management." Claire hesitated. She did not invite strangers into her life. She had bodyguards for events, assistants for errands, lawyers for problems. She didn't rely on neighbors. She barely spoke to them. But tonight, she was barefoot in a hallway with no phone, no keys, and no dignity left to lose. "Fine," she said, crossing her arms. "As long as you don't break it." The girl grinned and tugged at her father's sleeve. "See, Daddy, you can help." He set the groceries down carefully by the wall. "Got a hairpin." Claire blinked. "What?" Before she could answer, the little girl piped up proudly, "I have one." She pulled a sparkly purple hairpin from her pigtails and held it out like a treasure. The man crouched, taking it with a grin. "Thanks, Ella." Claire couldn't help herself. "You seriously plan to pick my lock with that?" "Worked before," he said casually, kneeling by her doorknob. "Single dad life. Sometimes you get creative when your kid locks herself in the bathroom, or when you forget your keys rushing to daycare." Claire folded her arms tighter. Single dad. That explained the little girl's attachment. She glanced at Ella, who was now humming to herself and swinging her backpack straps. There was something grounding about her innocence, something so far from Claire's world of deadlines and stock tickers. After only a minute, there was a soft click. The doorknob turned. Claire's jaw dropped. "You're kidding me." He stood, handing back the bent hairpin with a small smile. "Doors open." Claire stared at the door, then at him. "How?" "No, don't tell me. I don't think I want to know." He shrugged. "Just a trick or two. You'd be surprised what you learn when you don't have money for locksmiths every other month." She realized then he wasn't joking. This man wasn't a professional in a crisp suit. He was a father making do with what he had, teaching himself the kind of skills no boardroom would ever respect but were infinitely practical. For the first time all day, Claire laughed. Not the careful, polite laugh she gave at networking events. A real one, unguarded. It startled her almost as much as the lock opening. "Thank you," she said softly, pushing the door open. "You saved me from a very long night sitting in this hallway." "No problem," he said, lifting his groceries again. "Glad I could help." Claire watched as he started down the hall with Ella skipping beside him. Something about the sight tugged at her chest. Maybe it was the way he carried the heavy bag without complaint, or the way the little girl's hand fit trustingly in his. Maybe it was the simplicity of it, something she hadn't felt in years. "Wait," she called out before she could stop herself. He turned, eyebrows raised. "What's your name?" she asked. "Daniel," he said, "and this troublemaker's Ella." Ella waved enthusiastically. "Bye, door lady." Claire smiled despite herself. "Bye, Ella. Bye, Daniel." As they disappeared into their own apartment, Claire leaned against her now unlocked door. She couldn't explain it, but for the first time that week, maybe that year, she didn't feel quite so alone. What she didn't know was that the man who had just helped her, Daniel Carter, widowed father and construction worker, was about to become entangled in her life in ways no lock and key could ever predict. The following morning, Claire Montgomery stepped into the lobby of her apartment building, her heels clicking against the polished marble floor. She was dressed sharply in a navy blazer and cream blouse, the kind of outfit that said CEO even without an introduction. She carried her coffee-like armor, already bracing herself for another day of battles, emails, meetings, negotiations. But then she saw them. Daniel was crouched by the lobby bench, tying the shoelaces of his daughter's sneakers. Ella was giggling, her legs swinging wildly as if she couldn't keep still for even a moment. For a reason she couldn't quite explain, Claire slowed her steps. She didn't usually stop for people in the lobby. In fact, she usually passed through it like a ghost, efficient, untouchable, uninterested. But now, something tugged at her, something that had started last night when he opened her door with a sparkly hairpin. "Good morning," she said, her voice carrying more warmth than she intended. Daniel looked up, startled, then smiled politely. "Morning." Door still working. Claire allowed a faint smile to touch her lips. "Perfectly. Thank you again." Ella looked up with a grin. "See, Daddy's the best at doors." Claire crouched slightly, not minding that her designer skirt wasn't meant for bending. She met Ella's sparkling brown eyes. "I think you might be right." Ella beamed, as if she'd just been handed the world's greatest compliment. Daniel chuckled, shaking his head. "You'll give her a big head." Something inside Claire softened, a small crack in the armor she wore every day. She straightened, gave them both a polite nod, and walked out into the city morning. But she found herself glancing back once, just for a moment. Over the next few weeks, it kept happening. She ran into Daniel and Ella more often than coincidence should have allowed. In the coffee shop across the street, she spotted them at the counter, Daniel ordering a plain black coffee, Ella insisting she needed a hot chocolate with extra marshmallows. At the grocery store, she found herself behind them in line, watching Daniel juggle a basket full of basics while gently explaining to Ella why they couldn't buy the giant box of cookies she was hugging. On a Sunday morning, when Claire had reluctantly taken her laptop to the park to finish a report, she caught sight of Ella running through the grass, her laughter carrying on the wind. Daniel trailed after her, slower, carrying a kite under his arm. Claire told herself it was just coincidence. New York was big, yes, but neighbors crossed paths. That was all. Yet, each time she saw them, she lingered a little longer. Watched a little closer. Felt something she hadn't felt in years, something like longing. One evening, after a particularly grueling day, Claire found herself walking into the building at the same time as Daniel and Ella. Ella ran ahead, holding a balloon that bobbed cheerfully above her. "Hi, door lady," she squealed, waving. Claire laughed softly, shaking her head. "Hi, Ella." Daniel gave her a sheepish smile. "Sorry, she doesn't exactly do subtle." "It's fine," Claire said. Then, almost impulsively, she asked, "Did you two have fun today?" Daniel seemed surprised by the question. "Yeah, There was a street fair a few blocks away. Cotton candy, games, the works. Ella's on a sugar high. Ella proudly held out the balloon as evidence. Something inside Claire ached. She tried to remember the last time she'd done something that simple, that carefree. Her world revolved around mergers and projections, not balloons and cotton candy. They reached the elevators, and as the doors slid shut, Daniel glanced at her. "So, what do you do? Besides getting locked out of apartments?" Claire hesitated. People usually recognized her name instantly, or if not, their attitude changed once they heard her title. She hated that shift. The sudden calculation in their eyes, the way their smiles grew sharper, greedier. "I run a company," she said finally, keeping her voice even. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "That sounds like a lot of work." Claire gave a dry laugh. "You have no idea." And then she waited. For the usual follow-up questions, the probing, the interest in what she could offer. But Daniel just nodded. "Well," he said simply, "if you ever need another lock picked, or a cup of coffee, you know where to find me." The elevator dinged, and they stepped out. Ella skipped ahead, humming a tune. Claire lingered in the hallway, watching them disappear into their apartment. Dash. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, almost without realizing it, Claire began to look forward to those chance encounters. She started remembering how Daniel took his coffee, how Ella's laugh could brighten even her darkest moods. She noticed things she'd never paid attention to before, the way Daniel listened, really listened, when someone spoke. How his hands were always a little rough, like he'd been working hard with them all day. How he always put Ella first, without hesitation. It was a stark contrast to the men she worked with, men in expensive suits who measured everything in profit and loss, who looked at her like a challenge to outmaneuver. One night, after another exhausting meeting, Claire returned to the building past 9. She saw Daniel in the lobby, sitting on a bench with Ella asleep against his shoulder. He looked up when she entered, offering her a tired smile. "Long day?" he asked quietly, not wanting to wake his daughter. Claire paused, then nodded. "The longest." He gestured at the sleeping child. "You're not the only one." She refused to sleep without seeing the fish tank in the lobby. "And now?" He glanced down at her fondly. Out like a light, Claire felt her heart twist in a way she wasn't prepared for. She saw the weariness in him, but also the strength, the quiet patience. He wasn't just surviving. He was showing up every single day, for someone who depended entirely on him. She lowered her voice. "You're a good father." Daniel looked genuinely taken aback, then smiled softly. "I try." In that moment, Claire realized something. She didn't feel like the CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. She didn't feel like the woman constantly under scrutiny. She just felt like herself, like Claire. And maybe, just maybe, that night she'd been locked out of her apartment wasn't an accident at all. Maybe it was the universe giving her a way in.